Welcome to the Tom Sense Show. We are on the air right now with the news that actually matters. If you have a question at any point during this hour, drop it in the chat right now. We pull the best ones directly onto the screen as we go, so make it sharp and make it count. Tonight, the Supreme Court tells the White House obstructionists to pack it up. Hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars head out the door to the United Nations, and Arizona Democrats hand their own governor a clean bill of health. Let us get straight into it. The Supreme Court just handed down a massive win for common sense. Chief Justice John Roberts issued an emergency order that temporarily lifts a lower court injunction, clearing the way for construction on a $400 million ballroom and helipad facility on the south lawn of the White House. For months, activists, lawyers, and congressional watchdogs have been throwing every procedural roadblock they could find at this project. They ran to a federal judge, claiming the administration violated historic preservation rules and procurement procedures, successfully freezing the entire operation. The administration fought back, arguing the president has the operational authority to modernize the executive complex so our country can host foreign dignitaries properly without setting up cheap rental tents on the grass. John Roberts stepped in and put an end to the nonsense while the legal challenges play out on their merits in the appeals court. The people fighting this project are the exact same crowd that thinks America should look diminished on the world stage. They are perfectly fine spending billions of dollars sending foreign aid overseas to rebuild crumbling infrastructure in other nations. But the second we want to build a world-class facility to project American strength right at home, they run to court with a clipboard and a tape measure. The cranes are moving, the ground is breaking, and the obstructionists will just have to find another project to cry about. We have a terrible tragedy to report out of Alaska. A commuter aircraft crashed in a remote, rugged, mountainous region on Friday, killing all 8 people on board. Among the victims were 2 civilian personnel with the United States Army Corps of Engineers who were out conducting routine federal infrastructure surveys. Emergency search and rescue teams faced brutal regional weather conditions, but they managed to reach the wreckage early Saturday morning to recover the flight data equipment and the remains of those lost. The Department of the Army and local leaders have expressed their deepest condolences to the families of these public servants. Meanwhile, the National Transportation Safety Board, led by Chairwoman Jennifer Homendy, has deployed an investigative team to determine exactly what went wrong in the air. Federal aviation authorities have also opened a full safety review into the regional carrier, looking closely at their maintenance logs and daily operating procedures. Flying in rural Alaska is notoriously hazardous, with severe weather moving in fast over unforgiving terrain, and the people who do this work take immense risks every day to serve the country. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families, friends, and colleagues of everyone who was lost on that flight as investigators work to get clear answers on what caused this disaster. The State Department just notified Congress that it transferred $725 million of your hard-earned money to the United Nations. Why? Because the global body was crying that it faced an immediate liquidity freeze and would run out of cash to pay its own bureaucrats. Secretary General Antonio Guterres had been warning for weeks that the United Nations was on the verge of financial collapse, claiming member states owe billions in unpaid dues. United Nations finance experts say this massive check only covers operating payrolls for a few months, and they are already threatening that the United States could lose its General Assembly voting rights in January under Article 19 if we do not hand over the rest of the $4 billion they claim we owe them. Let that sink in for a moment. Appreciate you. Shlomi Pearl 4946 in the YouTube chat. Love right back at you. Good. Let's carry on. An international organization that spends most of its working hours passing resolutions, condemning American interests, and attacking our allies expects the American taxpayer to keep their office lights on and pay their lavish salaries. Every single conservative in Congress should be demanding to know why we are bankrolling an institution that treats our country like an automated teller machine. If the United Nations wants to stay in business, perhaps they should try cutting their own bloated budget instead of sticking their hands out to the American people. We just handed over hundreds of millions of dollars to an organization whose primary export is anti-American rhetoric. Looking over at the YouTube chat, Shlomi Pearl 4946 is asking when the war starts with Iran. Nobody has a crystal ball on the Middle East, my friend, but here's the plain reality. The foreign policy establishment in Washington always wants another endless conflict. Meanwhile, we are over here wiring $725 million to the United Nations so global bureaucrats can lecture us about peace. How about we put America first, secure our own borders, and stop footing the bill for the rest of the world before we start looking for new fights abroad? Okay, next up. The Department of War has terminated the editor and a veteran senior reporter at Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper funded by federal taxpayers. The dismissals came down after the journalist went on CBS News for a national television broadcast interview without department authorization. Pentagon officials made it clear that the firings were for direct insubordination and strictly enforced communications regulations regarding unapproved media appearances by agency personnel. Of course, press freedom groups and congressional lawmakers on the House Armed Services Committee are already in a total uproar, claiming this violates statutory protections meant to guarantee an independent editorial charter. They are already demanding formal testimony when Congress gets back into session. But here is the plain reality that the legacy media refuses to admit. If you work for an organization that is funded directly by the Pentagon, you do not get to ignore military media rules, run off to a legacy news network, and then cry censorship when your boss hands you a pink slip. Stars and Stripes is supposed to serve the troops on the front lines with reliable news, not serve as a launching pad for defense reporters looking to build their personal profiles on Sunday morning talk shows. Looking over at the YouTube chat, Shlomi Pearl 4946 says if we do not do something with Iran, they will have a nuke. Look, Shlomi, that is totally off what we are talking about with the Pentagon press office right now, but you are stating the obvious out loud. You do not stop bad actors with strongly worded letters and polite handshakes. You stop them with real American strength and clear red lines. Everyone knows it, and the foreign policy establishment pretends otherwise until it blows up in their faces. All right, staying on this. When an employee in the private sector blatantly breaks company media rules on national television, they get fired before lunch. The Pentagon simply applied the exact same standard to its own payroll. In news that will shock absolutely nobody, Arizona Democratic Attorney General Chris Mays has announced that the state will not file criminal charges against Arizona Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs. This comes after a full year-long investigation into alleged pay-to-play schemes involving state contract awards and campaign contributions from major vendors. Prosecutors spent 12 months looking at the evidence and concluded there was simply not enough proof to establish criminal intent or a formal quid pro quo under state law. Governor Hobbs immediately took a victory lap, claiming the whole inquiry was just a partisan attack cooked up by her political opponents in the state legislature. Republican state leaders pointed out the obvious truth, which is that the investigation leaves massive, unresolved ethical questions about how state contracts get handed out to campaign donors. It is always amazing how convenient the legal system becomes when one party controls both the executive office and the prosecutor who is supposed to be watching them. If a conservative governor had state contractors dumping massive political donations into campaign accounts right before landing lucrative public business, the mainstream press would be demanding a federal grand jury by dinner time. Instead, a Democratic attorney general looks over her political ally, declares that nobody meant any harm, and expects everyone in Arizona to pretend nothing happened. That is the news this hour on The Tom Sense Show. Stay grounded, keep your eyes open, and we will see you right back here next time.